I had a big generation of friends who were put on birth control like around 17. And like, it started to be the be all end all for like heavy periods, like, oh, like irregular periods in young girls. And we were a generation that were put on birth control very, very early. Do you think that is there's any effect that's happening there from now, those women sort of like turning 30, turning 35, turning 40, and having these early symptoms where maybe other generations didn't see it as much?
I think it's a question that needs to be asked. Like, I think you're absolutely right because, like, when you ask a regular traditional doctor, they'll be like, "Well, when you look at the literature, there's no long-term impact of birth control." Like, they'll tell you straight out that this has not been shown to like either reduce fertility or cause early menopause or anything like that. I think that, and then when you talk to generations before us, did they struggle as much as like us? And I look at my mother and I think yes, but it could be genetic, right? So we could have
Right.
something in my family specifically, but when it's hard to know that like where our women before us, it happened at 30 as well or younger, they were silenced and they
Mm,
couldn't talk about it, or they didn't have like the ability to do it, or didn't know what to talk about because they weren't didn't have, we just didn't know. So that was it always been a thing and then now we're just recognizing it? That's a question. I think birth control definitely needs to be questioned, like what it does to the body and totally decreasing the amount of hormones. If you were put on birth control at 15, are you the one that's suffering from endometriosis now at 27? Are you the one that has PCOS now early? Are you the one that's going through perimenopause? So I do think that like we don't have any studies to support that, but anecdotally, I could like imagine that could happen because you're not protecting the uterus, the ovaries, and the breasts from these hormones that are so protective and protecting the endometrial lining. So it would make sense that you'd end up with some of this pathology going on later. I think that birth control is like another form, like all the environmental toxins, like, so basically we call them estrogens. They're not estrogen for everybody on the phone. They're plastics, they're chemicals, they're phthalates, they're fragrances, they're parabens, pesticides that bind to the estrogen receptor. They do not bind to testosterone receptor. They are disproportionately
interesting.
impacting women. So women are being impacted by this. Like, there are we seeing these young women? We're seeing more cancer rates in young women, for example. Is all these chemicals are binding the estrogen receptor and lowering their estrogen? But did we have the chemicals when our mothers were? You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a, is this something new? I do think it's a crisis, whatever it is. Like, I think we need to be like addressing if it was going on, but now we're seeing it get really bad. That we're now we have all these environmental chemicals, we have birth control, and we have like a series of genetic things. And now we see like women really suffering with gut health, mental health. Like women take the bulk of the prescriptions. We're talking antidepressants, anti-anxiety, sleep aids, birth control. Lipitor, like statins for heart disease, like women take the bulk, and there's a lot of profit to be made off of women being sick. And I mean, it's not that it's like some giant conspiracy, but it's like there's no incentive for everybody to be healthy. You know what I mean? So I think it's like, okay, like you have to take your own control of it because nobody's going to make sure that you're healthy. Nobody's going to like remove all these chemicals from the environment and then make sure that your hormones are optimized. You have to do it yourself. So knowing that everything's against you, like basically everything is against women trying to get healthy. But if you were to just make sure your hormones are optimal, like for example, if your estrogen is optimal and it's binding to the receptor in your body, there's no receptor free for chemicals to bind to. If you think about it, those receptors are occupied. Where's the plastics and the pesticides going to bind if estrogen's there? So estrogen needs to be there first, and that will protect you theoretically. So start thinking about this as protecting you and not hurting you, which I think is the current narrative. This current narrative of hormones being dangerous.